So the purpose of today's discussion is by bringing together researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and decision makers. We aim to build a dialogue and form an initiative group focused on implementing sustainable solutions and real change in the field of digital well-being. At the core, we are addressing a very practical question: how do we reduce harm to young people in digital environments and ensure their well-being is protected as much as possible? Not in theory, but in real systems, education, health, policy, and regulation. And today's discussion will be done in two parts. The first part will focus on strategic direction, and the second part will focus on evidence to real-world application and commitment. And because of our time is limited to approximately 1 hour, I will ask each member of the panel to be very focused and concrete. And please concentrate on 1 or 2 key points with a maximum of 2 minutes per answer, and where possible, point to what can actually be done. The goal is simple. By the end of this discussion, we want to clearly see what are the most critical priorities and how should we maintain communication for further action in this area. Let us begin with the strategic direction and what should guide our thinking and action going forward. And for this part, I would like to invite Professor of Psychiatry, Professor Steiblienė, Professor of Psychology, Inga Truskauskaitė, Lithuanian Liberal Youth President, Mr. Umberto Masi, and digital policy expert from UK, Professor Roman-Urrestarazu, and digital safety expert from Estonia, Professor Susi. So, Professor Urrestarazu, through your extensive work in public health sector and in policy, you developed a shared vision in this field. What is the one priority you say that all sectors globally must align on to move from discussion about problematic internet use to action, to actually assure important change in addressing problematic use of the internet? Just press the button.
Oh, there you go. Very fancy. So I think that the most important thing, in my view, is what I briefly mentioned in my presentation, is the idea of the precautionary principle. I think researchers are not, we do not have a monolithical approach in the face of overwhelming evidence. We're still finding it very difficult to prove a causal effect of exposure in such a complex phenomenon as PUI. But at the same time, we do observe I think the observational effects of these consequences in young children, adolescents, and also adults. So I think the precautionary principle needs to be at the center of any decision-making around policy initiatives, and I think also in the way that we see and tackle the problem. The other, I think, problem I see is this sort of idea of problems only being individual problems. So this idea that comes from psychology and psychiatry, in which we observe the effects of PUI at the individual level. I think there are also second-order effects of PUI that are way more complex than exclusively related to what individuals face, and they can relate to the effects of having, for example, an earlier age, to the first time that children get exposed to pornography, to the way that sales are done online, to the way that the political discourse is also affected by the way that we engage with the digital world. And those effects are not exclusively psychiatric or psychological, but needs to be seen from a way broader base of analysis than we currently have.
Thank you. And I know Professor Susi just joined us, but stemming from this, so there's the precautionary principle and there is this individual level that we have to consider. So what is one non-negotiable principle from a digital human rights perspective that must guide any digital intervention or prevention strategy when we go forward? What are your thoughts?
Well, there can be many, but you ask only for one. And the one would be the engagement of an individual, a human being. In the other words, when digital interventions are being planned, when new tools are being developed, it should never be a situation when certain decisions are made only by an algorithm. There always needs to be a human engaged. It's a very complex situation. How many minutes I have, Julius, to reply? 2 minutes. I will give you an example which I guess many of you may know. You go away from this conference, you go to the airport, there are 2 planes, exactly the same planes, price the same, flight time the same. You are told that one plane is being flown by a human pilot, the other by AI, and you are told that most accidents happen because of a human error. But I can tell you, most of you would go to the plane which is being flown by a human, not by an AI. And that is the reason that for some psychological purpose, we still need to make certain that humans are engaged in all digital interventions. So have the human element, that's the answer.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And now we move with this discussion with the 2 professionals working with humans, being in close connection, seeing behavioral addictions, working with behavioral addictions. These are Professor Steiblienė and Professor Inga Truskauskaitė. And question from me for you are that practitioners and scientists understand narrowing gap between clinical practice, research evidence, and political decisions at a national scale. From your perspective, what is the most urgent issue in young people's digital environment that needs a systematic response? So perhaps we go first by Professor Steiblienė and then Professor Truskauskaitė could add.
Very good question, and today what we heard today in our conference and what we know from our research, that today we're talking about chronic impact of digitally mediated stress on our young people brain development and emotional regulation, and at the same time on identity formation. And I, as psychiatrist, have a great anxiety about changes in our brain of young people. Today, when we have knowledge about what does it mean anxiety disorders, what does it mean depressive disorders, and we know that changes in neurotransmitters level, in functionality of the brain, and even in morphology of the brain is related to these mental disorders. And today we are talking about our children, about our grandchildren, and about our young generation when increasing anxiety, increasing depressive disorders, increasing addictions, and data about relation between internet use and alcohol use disorders, tobacco use disorders, and even street drugs. It shows that brain is changing. It means that this problematic use could change all the generation. And we have in reality, we have to stop this process. And what we're doing now, shouting, talking, and going to the policymakers, that we have to do like conglomerates, like working together, healthcare professionals, schools, families, and policymakers to stop that urgent situation what we have in our mental health. And very urgent, it was data from Switzerland that increasing healthcare needs for young generation, for the children, it's also related to our days problems, and we have to change the world just now.
Thank you. Hopefully we are successfully doing that. And Professor Truskauskaitė.
Hello everyone. There are 2 points that I would like to share with you today. First thing is that we need to keep in mind that the digital world does not exist in vacuum. It actually usually only amplifies the vulnerabilities that the young people already have. If we look at the numbers of mental health problems in the young generations, they are already very high. And if we compare, for example, young adults up to 29 years old to older adults, like the numbers of mental disorders, they might be like twice as high as in other age groups. And of course, also the younger people are the users of the digital technologies. So I think that this is not, when we're talking about kids, maybe we can control and regulate, but when we're talking already about the adults, young adults, you cannot just say them, stop using the technology. It's not going to happen. What we do need to do is to build skills, and specifically the resilience that could, tackle, first of all, the mental health and also the self-regulation, which could be like the inspiration for taking care of themselves when we're talking about the lives of young people.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. And I'm now leading this discussion further. I'm just thinking, are we missing something from the young people perspective, as you, Professor, just mentioned, that we cannot just impose sanctions on them? And it's particularly interesting to hear thoughts from Mr. Masi, who is a youth representative. So could you share your ideas on what is the thing that institutions most often overlook when talking about changes and decisions with regards to problematic use of the internet?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today as the president of the Lithuanian Youth Council. I think the thing that is most overlooked is young people themselves. We are thinking about digital spaces and digitalization and the harm it causes to young people, but at least here we have a young person, and additionally in the audience I see young people and people of other generations, and I think this is a very grave issue in looking at how actually we take these decisions and how we make them. Because what we would be left without trying to engage those young people, we can push those young people away, in general breaking more trust, because it's not just a policy decision. It has a great impact on how young people socialize, on how young people participate, and on how young people see the world through the lens of social media, of their phones. Because the second point, I'll have 3 points. The second point is, and I'm also glad that today the adults are in the room, but it isn't always the case when we talk about engaging young people themselves. It's not the case, I think, that the iPad kids just went up and picked up those iPads and started playing games, downloading them, creating accounts on social media pages. I think what we are also missing is the collective responsibility that we have as a society to work together as young people, as adults, to actually create those environments where young people are safe. And it is sad to be, I'm sad to say and state this, but I think in a way we have failed, I think. Because until now, and I think it's no mystery to you all, that the people who run these social media platforms, they keep their children away from these platforms, and it has been confirmed various times. So I think it's good that we're actually moving and trying to solve these issues. And finally, I would very much highlight the fact that what comes next, what happens when we implement it, because I think, and it maybe is strange to hear from a youth representative to say, yes, we are sort of in favor, because the numbers don't lie. It's extremely clear that there are problems and there are issues. But how do we go about that is question number one. Question number two is, what are we going to do when we take away this? Because it's also a way how young people pass the time, engage, as I mentioned, and this has to be followed by very many, I think, steps in order to create young people who are engaged and to create these environments, these third places or third spaces that have been all but lost after the move and ever moving towards social and digital places, because we have realized now that, hey, we can do stuff digitally after the pandemic. But where is the infrastructure? Where are the possibilities for young people to form communities and strengthen bonds? And indeed, this does take an intergenerational, I think, approach, and also additional work on the real life and opportunities of young people.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts, and I'll use this opportunity because the whole day we were just presenting results and talking about policies, and at the start of the conference I shared this idea of dialogue. So please, if you have any questions for the panel members on the strategic directions that we have to make, this is a good time. So please introduce yourself, push the microphone button, and you may ask a question.
Hello, I'm Neringa Mažeikė. I represent Lithuanian Consumers Alliance, which is an NGO, and we are working for a project React pilot, where we are looking into negative consequences for minors' health in gaming platforms. Actually, we are lacking a lot information, some surveys and statistics on the negative effects, and this is very nice to find such a conference and to see that such an in-depth researches are going on, and I guess that maybe we can cooperate and make some result together. But from our point of view, we see that it's quite, we are quite fragmented, like policymakers, people who enforce the legal acts, lawyers, digital policy makers, NGOs are like on different pages, and I think that there is a lack of interaction. To my knowledge, it's not enough represented the healthcare professionals' position even in European Union legislation. I'm not very well informed, but I'm not sure whether health specialists are properly involved in the current legislation processes while simplifying the legislation of digital policy and the omnibuses. Whether health experts participate properly while defining the criteria, what is considered as deceptive designs, deceptive and manipulative algorithms. So maybe you can just somehow respond to what extent do you participate in the legislation process. Another point, what I'm missing today in this discussion is the enforcement element. We have institutions, and of course the digital legislation is still quite new, but to our understanding it's quite still missing at least information for society, how the institutions cooperate. There should be some clear schemes how to report and concerning which questions to which institutions you should refer. For instance, like the case of sexualized content in Telegram, the recent issues, I think that there should be more public debate on that, and people should be informed, because consumers are actually not, so far, are not very well informed on even very simple rights that they have under Digital Services Act or any other European Union legislation.
So I'll stop you here, because we have a limited time to respond, because there are so many issues raised, and hopefully we'll...
But one more very important point is also the question of responsibility of digital services providers, because according to the Digital Services Act, Article 6, the general obligation is for the platforms to remove content when they are informed that it's illegal. But how should we treat, from the legal point of view, like when Trusted Flagger, the last year, they, for instance, reported 6 million of scam advertisements which were removed by the platform, and 27,000 of fake accounts were removed. So, and this illegal content is again and again multiplied. Shall we consider that in such a case, when it's already reported and removed many times, is the platform responsible, and do we consider that it's informed about the illegal content? So
thank you. Hopefully part of your question will touch on the second part of the discussion, when, especially with regards to the enforcement issue, when we move to the commitment part. But I'm thinking about the topics that were touched on: fragmentation and regulation, and whether scientists and health practitioners are involved in this. So maybe starting by Professor Urrestarazu and then Professor Susi, do you have any ideas with regards to scientists being involved in policy decision making, whether they are part of what we just presented today, and maybe if you could touch a little bit on the enforcement issue, that would also be very relevant. Probably Professor Susi could answer this.
So the great answer to all of that is it depends. So look, I think that there is this idea in policy, which I think is not necessarily the right idea, that somehow scientists are going to come in with guns blazing and a book of evidence and put it on the table, and politicians will listen to them, and suddenly the problem is going to be sorted because they're going to be on the right side of history. And I think that's not how policy works. We are literally dealing to a challenge, a regulatory challenge, that makes tobacco and alcohol look like kindergarten, okay? The amount of money that these companies represent is probably about 20% of the global GDP, okay? So, yeah, I mean, I have participated in policy processes. I have given evidence for the Digital Services Act. I don't think that that is really where the discussion is, leading to. I mean, I can provide, my parliament with evidence showing that kids that are self-harming and accessing anorexia content are struggling. And as you said, money is money. And specifically in this area, I don't think that thinking that somehow it is the responsibility of scientists to provide discursive elements to be able to create policy is the right approach. I think this is a civil society, broader civil society issue, and that involves all sorts of sectors, from, as you very well represent, I'm sure, consumer products, to, and consumer rights, all the way up to enforcement agency, to civil society as a whole, teachers, students, etc. I don't feel particularly special talking about the evidence because I work in this area and I provide evidence, because I think it's kind of talking about people's experiences when they're already experiencing. I think probably 99.9% of people here in this room has had a social media account. And the best way I put it, in terms of, for example, algorithmic transparency, I don't know if you've ever done a check-in in Ryanair. The design is, let's say, they can get away with things, and that's just, like a silly little airline. The kind of things that you observe, the gamification of purchases that you might do online, the way that searches are going to change with the eruption of AI. I don't think those are issues that people are completely alien to. It's not that we're talking about a specific genetic subtype of cancer. It's just our daily life is being inundated by this type of experience. We know what it is. We know what it is to make a purchase at 10:30 in the evening before you go to bed because you've been bombarded and whatnot. And I think that relying on somehow the smoking gun to make a decision about policy issues is actually against the purpose of policy. If you look at tobacco, we knew that tobacco caused cancer from the 40s, and it took 40 years to be able to legislate that. Probably here back in the 60s, people were smoking cigars and pipes, and it was completely normal. And that was after 20 years of having known that it caused cancer. So, yeah, it's not like an easy thing. I think people rely on the scientificist argument too much for this type of issue. I think these are social problems, and I am a psychiatrist. I work with people that have this type of problems, but somehow I don't think it's science's role to create this discursive element, as I mentioned.
I would reply then to the question about enforcement. That is one of the main problem areas related to internet. Let me just give you one quick example. What's the difference between digital and non-digital domains? You have somebody who wants to publish in a newspaper information which you consider insulting towards somebody. You go to the judge issues an injunction, the newspaper is not published, and it may take years for you to go to courts and find out if the injunction was justified or not. If somebody wants to publish an insulting information on the internet, which very often happens, the judge is powerless. You cannot go to any judge. It happens, and even if the internet site then removes that information, somebody may already have magnified it, sent it to other sites. So enforcement, as we know it from the offline world, does not exist in the online world. So that is the main message. It is not possible to enforce your rights on the digital domain. And perhaps on more philosophical level, the meaning of what is enforcement, it changes. We are used to the situation that we have somebody to whom we complain. In the digital domain, there is no separation of powers. There is no legislative, executive, and judicial branch. It's the same internet company, the same big social media company who creates the laws, which we know as the community standards. Then we have somebody who is monitoring it. These are the people who are sitting behind the screens or an algorithm. And finally, we have a complaints board. Have you tried to go to the complaints board and said that your posting was taken down in an unjustified way? It's very difficult. So it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's main and yet unfortunate message. And you were talking about this digital, sort of the helplessness you might feel in front of the digital companies, and the Professor Urrestarazu also mentioned the profit they are generating, and they are sometimes using this as an argument when we talk about certain policies. So I was wondering of what are the young people's views on digitalization, particularly when it comes to addressing the risks associated with increasingly digital world, and especially with the companies with sometimes using addictive design. So Mr. Masi, could you expand on that as well?
While I do represent the Lithuanian Youth Council, I cannot speak for every single young person on their purview on social media. What I can speak on, however, is the fact that we've had very handily a sort of poll that we organized in a separate project, and out of I think 5,000 respondents, we gauged how many would or where do these young people gather their information, their news from, and also their habits, what they think about their screen times. And the large majority of the respondents do want to limit their screen times. I think it was over 60% that say, yes, I think I am using my telephone too much. However, we are in a world now where you literally have to be in the media or on social media to be seen. This is in a book by Professor Lindos Donskis and Zygmunt Bauman. This philosopher Donskis says, we are now in a paradigm where you need to be on social media, therefore I am. That is, I must be seen on social media, therefore I am. And it's a very grave, I think, situation for young people, because they do realize the harm, they can see it. I am of the opinion that young people are capable of understanding and of seeing and knowing the general trends. However, especially when we talk about younger young people, when I'm saying young people, I mean 15, 16-year-olds, because we're talking about limiting up until 16, right? But we have 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds. They do have a certain idea about life already, because they've seen what's going on around them, yet the problems begin when we put them, or we have this situation that I mentioned. That is, how are you going to be part of the discussions or engagement and socialization process with your peers if you are not on, let's say, Snapchat, Instagram, even TikTok? And that is extremely problematic. Now also to maybe finalize, and regarding also another thing is that it's not just a mean to socialize, but also to get the news from those media platforms, right? And I'll say worryingly that in this poll that we had around, when we asked basically, how can we reach young people best? Through which social media platform? The top one was TikTok. And that is a whole different dimension of an issue that I will not touch upon today because it will take way more time. But to summarize briefly, I think young people today are now in a situation, as in many different, let's say, areas of policy, I'll say, where they're between a rock and a hard place. Yes, you want to limit your exposure to social media or to digital life, but how are you going to engage with the most part of your peers who may not think directly in the same way as you do? So I think this would be the main takeaway that I would share here today.
And in your message, you also mentioned that you feel that young people are really capable in making informed decisions if they have the data, they have the information. So maybe touching on that, Professor Truskauskaitė, do you have some optimism in this area, you know, from the mental health perspective?
Absolutely, I do, and I'm really happy that you asked me, because I wanted to say we need some optimism here, because what actually research shows, and what I see while working with the clients, that actually not all participation in the digital world or not all participation in the social media is harmful. Some things are even useful for mental health. If you are using these platforms for what they were created, or at least seem to be created in the first place, right? For communication, for sharing, for building the network, for finding the people. For example, some of the, I don't know, very adolescents or young adults who feel like black sheeps in their environment. They can find the people they can connect with through the internet. And actually, this is a very good thing. And research states very clearly, it can be useful if you're using it for socializing and, taking care of your needs and building your network, building your resilience. In contrast, if you're using the social media for the, passive observation, just scrolling, comparing yourself with others, then it might be problematic. And also, I want to share one other thing that actually what our own data shows that when people, from all the symptoms of the addictive social media use, the one that stands out is using social media with the purpose to forget your problems. I mean, like that when you're feeling bad, you're just to forget the world, you go scroll and you feel that the world doesn't exist anymore, right? And we found that in the youth subsample, we have one third had highly increased the symptom. And probably I think that going back to this idea that young people are capable, they can make the decision, but we sometimes need to empower them not by, making some restrictions, but by supporting where they actually need support. And in my opinion, one of this field is absolutely some mental health. And if we support the mental health, we might be seeing less social media addiction.
So, just very briefly, Professor Steiblienė, from the psychiatric perspective, from the looking at the strategic direction, how can we support, how can we strengthen this mental health with regards to PUI issues?
When we're talking about young people mental health, we have to start with the family, because the family is basic of our society. We have to talk with families, the families give more attention for the children, for the young, more communication, not only messaging, but just talking. Talking with mother, with father, with brothers, sisters, and this talking is very, very important. Because when you would like to decrease something, like internet use, you have to increase something in another position. So, talking with families and giving information for families is very important, and we have to start from this base and go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So having heard of this, I would like to address back Professor Roman-Urrestarazu. Having heard all this, where do you see the strongest alignment? I know it's hard to align all the different opinions and the words just said. We touched on very different topics, the fragmentation, the personal responsibility, the capability of young people, the enforcement issues. So in the strategic direction, because you are an expert in doing all the mapping, so if you map out this discussion, what could be your message?
So, I mean, I don't know if I don't have a crystal ball, but what I do think that's happening, and this is something that, I mean, when we started the Bootstrap project, we started working on it roughly, Julius, 2024? When we were working the proposal, we're now, 2.5 years down the hatch, and I think things have changed. So the kind of things when we started working on this project that are common to discuss these days, such as, for example, things like age restrictions or school bans. I mean, like school bans, kids are not allowed to have a phone at school. I mean, to make that even a polemical thing for me, it's just, absurd, but we need to go to that absurd to make sense of the reality we're dealing with. I think have become commonsensical. And I think from that common sense, it's easier to build bridges, to have a united front about what needs to be done, to have a minimum common denominator of policy, of discussions, of things that we think are important. Precisely looking at things that are very basic, in my view, such as school bans, such as that kids, in the case of Britain, but I think elsewhere, are not able to sign contracts before they're legally allowed to sign contracts with tech companies. That, for example, it is important that attention is gold in young people, and therefore any distractions, of course, interferes with school performance, and that school performance is going to be at the center of everything in their future lives. So all of these kind of discussions that seem somehow lost, I think, have come back. And I think it's really important that we don't lose that focus about how things have been changing. I think there's also, I think, from the community of parents, teachers, an annoyance and I think a sort of mobilization, let's say, drive to try and make these issues that they face in the classrooms with the children, and also, as other people were saying, the children themselves and adolescents themselves saying, like, you know what, I just don't feel very nice after I've been 6 hours on my phone. I really want to cut my exposure. And the other thing, I mean, the other issue as well that I think is really interesting is how social media has changed. So it used to be, I mean, back in the day that people used to post, things. Now you have this kind of what I call like the zombie society. So this sort of society of influencers, which are not really kind of the people that we're looking at. I mean, it's literally believing that, somehow Michael Jackson is a role model. It's just some sort of media creation, mostly self-managed, that produces a really odd effect. And if you look at this idea of people posting about their social life, the social aspect of social media is something that I think in general has almost disappeared. It's not part of the way that children and we deal with social media as it used to be. We were talking about that as well with a couple of people on the way here. The other issue is the only aspect that we've kept of social media is also the aspect of instant messaging. So things like Telegram, WhatsApp, that is where that social connection is produced. It's not produced in Instagram or TikTok. I mean, that's just sort of influencer territory, it's very marketized, etc. But it's at that level that I think the discussion has moved into, specifically among children. And of course, with the issues that we discussed about exposure to sexual material, all the risks that you can think of, So I think, I don't know, I mean, in a way, probably if I told my grandparents that because phone numbers used to be gold, you had your own phone number as a family, but now, it's such a common occurrence that I think we need to sort of look back at that level of how you mix individual rights with this idea that children should have a telephone, should have certain things as a must. And I think hopefully this will stand.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, panel, for this discussion. And we'll now move to the second part of this discussion.